So one of the biggest questions in life is this: who is God? Who is God, right? Like, what is God like? What are the characteristics of God? Who is God? Now, by the time that I got to high school, if you would have asked me this question, who is God, I probably wouldn't have talked to you. But if I would have described it something like this. Well, God is kind of like an old guy with white hair and a big beard who stands on a cloud and throws lightning bolts down on us when we mess up, and sometimes just because he feels like it, right? Like, that's how I would have answered who God was. I had a very warped idea of who God was. Now, I don't know all the reasons, all the difficulties or whatever, or maybe it was because the pastor in the church I grew up in was an old guy with white hair. Maybe it was because that's basically a description of the Greek god Zeus, and I spent too much time watching Xena Warrior Princess growing up. There's some other 90s kids in here, right? I don't know why, but this was my view of God. It was a warped idea of who God was. And so it really changed how I thought that you knew God or didn't know God. It changed kind of everything about faith because I had this warped idea of who God was. And a lot of us do. We live in this time and place where we're encouraged to make up our own idea of God, aren't we? Hey, if you aren't comfortable with this faith or that faith's idea and definition of who God is, just make it up to fit what you already want to be true. We're encouraged to do this. As Voltaire, that French philosopher in the 18th century, said, in the beginning, God created man in his own image, and man has been trying to repay the favor ever since. Ever since. It's so easy to make up. It's so tempting. It's so easy, and now it's so popular to just make up your own view of God. Who is God? You just make it up. Who is God? Well, years and years ago, Jesus told this amazing story. And if we pay attention to the story this morning, it will help us know who God is. This story is called, often we call it the prodigal son. Jesus actually titles it A Father and His Two Sons. But it's this beautiful story, and Jesus told a lot of stories that they get to just deeper things that we wouldn't be able to remember or understand without these beautiful stories. And so he told this story of these three characters, a father and his two sons. So a couple weeks ago, we read this story. Yes, we are reading the exact same story 3 weeks in a row. I hope you're entertained by it, right? Like, it's an awesome story, but we're reading it 3 weeks in a row. So the first week, we looked at the younger son. We looked at the whole story at the younger son. Then we looked at the older son. And so this week, we're looking at the final character of the story, the father. And the father represents God. The father represents God in the story. Jesus is trying to teach you a deeper truth about who God is through this character of the father in this story. And so who is God? Well, pay attention to the father in this story. We're going to focus on the father in this story. And we're going to find 4 deep truths that often challenge what we think about who God is. Here's how it starts. Luke 15, if you've got your Bibles with you. If you don't, the words will be up on the screen here. Luke 15, we'll start in verse 11. Jesus continued. There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." So he divided his property between them. Who is God? Well, in this parable, the father represents God. And what this younger son asks the father would have utterly shocked everyone in the audience. In their day, it was the same as telling your dad, like, "Dad, I kind of wish you were dead, so just give me your stuff, man," right? He has no love for his father. Now, the funny thing is, these parables, it doesn't mean that this happened. Jesus is coming up with hypothetical stories in these parables to teach you something deeper about faith, right? And so in this story, if this would have been happening in real life in the first century, and this younger son comes to a dad and is like, "Dad, sell your stuff, wish you were dead," the dad would slap him across the face and be like, "You're out of the family, man," right? Kick him out of the house. They wouldn't put up with this in real life. But in this story, actually, the father, he agrees. The father actually accepts the son's choice, grants his request, gives him the money, and he lets them leave. Because the father is God in this story. And the shocking thing is that God actually allows you to reject him. Verse 13. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. So this down and out young Jewish man, he's so hungry that he makes himself the indentured servant of a non-Jewish person, of a Gentile, which would have been shocking. Everybody in Jesus' audience, as he tells this story, is Jewish. This has been utterly shocking. This guy rejected the good authority of his father to instead accept worldly and sinful authority. That's how they would have seen it in the first century. And to make matters worse, he's raising pigs. The Jewish Talmud told them, "Cursed be the man who keeps swine." And so the son, he has lost any familial ties to his identity, any religious identity ties. He's just out there, right? But you got to ask in the story, like, where's the dad? Dad's back home, right? Dad's back home. He's allowed this to happen. And remember that the father in this story represents God and who God is. And so God allows us the consequences of sin. He allows the consequences of sin to work themselves out in the lives of those who rebel against him. The father let the son leave. The father let him leave. God allows us to choose to love or reject him. But why in the world does God give us this ability to choose, this form of free will, to choose to love or leave him? C.S. Lewis, one of my favorite authors of all time, he put it this way: free will, though it makes evil possible, is also the only thing that makes possible any love or goodness or joy worth having. A world of automa, of creatures that work like machines, would hardly be worth creating. So why does God give us this ability to choose him or not? Well, it's because he wanted love. That's why God created you. He created you for love, to experience this relationship of love where you love him and he loves you and you know him and he knows you. And for that to be real, for that love to be real, the reason that you were created to be real, you have to have the choice not to love. Think of it like this. Imagine tomorrow you're feeling a little unloved, right? And so you're like, I know how to fix this because I have Amazon. And Amazon fixes everything, right? And so you're like, I'm going to do Alexa same-day shipping. So you do Alexa same-day shipping, and that little Alexa dot, which creeps me out, and people's like it shows up, and you program the thing. And so every time you enter the house, you have that thing programmed to when you walk in the front door, it goes, I love you, right? Or I don't know what voice your Alexa is, right? So like you walk in the house, you're like, I love you. Oh, thank you, Alexa. I mean, first, don't do that. You won't have any friends. That's super weird, right? But if you did that, is that real love? No. Why? Because as Lewis says, it's just an automa. It's automatic. It is a machine. It is a robot, and therefore it cannot choose love because no choice is involved. It's simple programming. Unlike a person, Alexa doesn't have a choice. God gives you the free will to embrace or reject him. Because without that choice, our love for him is not real, and that is why he made us. We'd be nothing more than a robot, nothing more than a Alexa speaker, mindlessly repeating words. Who is God? God is a God who loves us so much that he lets us choose to love or leave him. Verse 17. When he came to his senses, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have food to spare? And here I am starving to death. I'll set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. This is a way of saying God and against you, because in that day you couldn't say the proper name Yahweh. It was seen as just disrespectful, right? So I have sinned against God, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. So he got up and went to his father. So here you get to see this son's inner monologue, right? You get to see him practicing this speech, this plan that he's going to go back and pitch to his dad about how he's going to pay his dad back and work his way back into his father's good graces. But he knows he's not worthy. And as you read his words, as short as they are, you can tell, like, this guy's nervous, right? You can tell that he thinks he's going to walk back and his dad's going to be mad at him and not, like, forgive him. You can tell that he's worried, that he's kind of cowering in fear, cowering in shame as he walks home. When I was a kid, our neighbors, one house over to the right, they got a golden retriever named Sam. And the idea of getting Sam was that the dad wanted a hunting dog. But Sam had other ideas. So I don't know if Sam was a vegetarian or a pacifist, but Sam was not having any of the hunting thing. He did not like to get the birds at all. So like every day the dad would be in the backyard trying to train Sam, and all you would hear is yelling, because Sam didn't do any of it. And it really frustrated this dad. It's like, I bought you to be a hunting dog, you won't do it. So one day Sam, he runs away. He escapes the backyard, and we lived in this like circle neighborhood, and he's running all the way around, having a blast, doing dog stuff, right? And so Sam, he's just having the time of his life, and I'm out in my front yard, and he's been gone for a few hours, right? With all the kids in the neighborhood looking for him, and I see him coming back home, right? He's got that big dog smile on his face, and he's running back home, and he's getting close, and he's all happy, and then he sees the porch, and his dad was standing on the porch, and immediately he went from all happy to like, oh, like cow. He's like, oh, I know it's coming, right? And he cowered down in this, just this like, I'm so scared. I had so much shame that I shouldn't have run away. It's fun. I shouldn't have run away. And he's got this shame and this fear, and so he's just cowering down. And of course, the dad comes off the porch yelling at him, Sam, I can't repeat the words he said in church, right? All this stuff. And a lot of times, that's how I think that we picture God. Like we have this subtle thing where we import our shame on him, and we think whenever we mess up that, man, if we go back to him, it's going to be this, we cower. It's like, he's going to be mad at me again. I can't. And so we approach God with all this shame and this fear because we think God is like that dad on the porch just waiting to yell at us. Just wanting to be unforgiving, wanting to throw all the fear and the shame. And so a lot of us, we're in this posture of expecting God to be this unforgiving, angry God. Expecting this God who's going to point the finger. So is that what this younger son gets? He's expecting it. He's cowering. Is that what this younger son experiences from his father? Now, verse 20. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. Back in the day, Middle Eastern patriarchs did not run. It was undignified. Children, they would run. Young men, they would run, but not the patriarch of an estate. No, that was far too undignified. But here you have this father, this patriarch. He's lifting his robes to sprint down the road to get to his son. The Greek says he literally fell on his son's neck. He's crying. Can you get the picture here? He's running, he's out of breath, and he's crying, and he's so joyful to see his son, and he's kissing him, and he won't stop. It's so undignified. It's so the opposite of what you would expect from a guy like this. And notice the father. He has compassion before he hears this recited speech that his son's been working on. And this father, he forgives the son before the son has any ability to start paying anything back and earning anything. According to the Jewish law at this time, if your child was rebellious, if you had a rebellious son, you could take your son down to the village elders, and they would debate on whether your son should be stoned to death. Don't get any ideas, right? That was a thing. Robin's like, that? Some of us get that. Okay, so can you imagine being the son? And that's a possibility, right? That's on the table. And you fit the description. And instead, your dad runs down the road to hug you to kiss you, to forgive you, to love you. You see, God is a God who extends forgiveness instead of shame. Too many of us, we approach God like a cowering dog. I know I do it when you mess up. You're like, oh, goodness, he's going to be so mad. It's not the God we serve. It's not the God we serve. He's not that dad standing on the porch waiting to scream at us. He's the dad running down the road to get to us and kiss us and love us. That's the God we serve. That's the God we serve. He's running down the street for you. Who is God? God's a God who extends forgiveness instead of shame. Forgiveness instead of shame. Verse 21. The son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven, against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. So the son, he starts to recite. Remember when he was reciting his whole speech, his plan to pay him back, to say sorry? He starts reciting it, but he doesn't finish it because the father interrupts. The son has this plan to restore himself, but the father has a far better plan. And so the father interrupts and is like, no. Your plan stinks. I got a different plan, and here it is, verse 22. But the father said to his servants, quick, bring the best robe, put it on him, put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. So if you remember back when the son, he was with the Gentiles, no one would give him anything. No one gave him anything. But now he's given everything by the Father who he wounded so deeply. And Jesus, of course, is brilliant. He's very specifically choosing these gifts that the Father gives his Son. And each has a symbolism to it. And so he gives him the robe, and that was a way of saying, like, your authority as a son in this family has been restored. And he gives him a ring, and that ring was probably the signet ring. And if you wore a signet ring, you could sign documents for your family, right? And so it was a way of being like, no, you're back in this family. And he gives him his sandals because the son has so little when he returns to the father. He has so little when he returns home that he doesn't even have shoes on his feet. And so it's the way the father is saying, I will provide for you and protect you again. Each one of these gifts is chosen because the Father wants them to see, like, you're fully restored. You're fully redeemed. This isn't like a partial plan here. You see, when you come back to God, when you return home to God, God's not like, ooh, you messed up a lot, so you've got a 3-month probation period before you're back in this family, right? God doesn't go, oh, you did this stuff. You need a little bit of a trial period. You got a trial period of 2 years this time, and then we'll go from there, okay? No. When you come to God and you turn and you repent and you trust, just like this son did, there's no probation period. There's no trial test. You are fully and completely and utterly forgiven. You are fully and completely in the family and his. Verse 23, bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. So in that day, like you would raise these animals specifically for large feasts. And the same son who literally couldn't find anything to eat is being celebrated with this lavish party. Now back in that day, of course, you didn't have like a Maytag freezer out in the barn. And so if you're gonna slaughter an animal, what's gonna happen to the meat? If you slaughter a whole cow, family can't knock that out in one night, right? And so you invite the town. You invite the whole town. But feeding a town is super expensive, right? They're expecting wine and bread and all, dessert. You got to feed all these people. The redemption of the Son did not come cheaply, and yet the Father is willing to pay the cost. Why would the Father do this? Well, he says this in verse 24. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. So they began to celebrate. The son was dead to them. He was lost. But now as he returns home, he's alive again. They can see him again. They can hug him again. And he's found. He's found. Yes, the son had to repent, right? He had to return to the Father, and he had to trust the Father, just like we do. But there was a cost that had to be paid. The father had already paid that huge cost of selling off a portion of everything he owned as his estate, and now the father's on the hook again. The father's paying a cost again. This huge celebration, this huge way to redeem and restore his son. There was a cost that had to be paid, but the father was willing to pay the cost. The son comes with nothing. And yet the father, and only the father, could pay this cost. The son couldn't pay it for him. So over the summer, we were on a bit of vacation to Missouri, and our daughter is 8, and she is smart. So we know someday she's going to go to college, right? And so we were like, oh, there's this college, way too early for a college visit, by the way. It's like a decade too early, right? But we're like, we'll go by there and just see how it is, right? Why not? And so we go to this college, and she's getting all excited as we drive around campus, and we ask some students questions like, do you like it? She might go here. And they're like, she looks a little small to go here. Like, what are you talking about? Like, well, she'll be taller, right? Like, and so we go to this. So she's getting excited. So we're talking about college for a few days. A couple nights later, we're talking about college, and I'm like, well, college is really expensive. And she's like, oh, wow. It's like, it's really expensive, actually. And she's like, Daddy, it's okay. I have $20 in my piggy bank. And I'm like, baby, it costs like $60,000, right? And she can't even imagine that. She can't even imagine the cost that it would cost for her to go to school. Like, she can't pay that. She can't pay that. She can't. She doesn't have it. She won't have it. She can't pay the cost. It's impossible, but we can try. God is like that. He's willing to pay our cost that we can't pay. Like this son, we've all rebelled against God. And like him, we owe a cost we can't pay ourselves. But God became one of us in Jesus to die a death on the cross to pay a cost that we can't pay for our redemption. And we need to stop tricking ourselves into thinking that our redemption is just one more good act, one more good day, one more good behavior away from us achieving it. That's like $20 in the $60,000 of college. You can't pay it. You can't. God is a God who's willing to pay our cost. God is God who's willing to pay our cost. But now the story, it turns to the older son. So the interesting thing is, you actually get to see this father interact with both of his sons, right? Verse 25. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing, so he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. Your brother's come, he replied, and your father has killed the fattened calf because he is back safe and sound. The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So this older brother, he's mad, he's hot. And he'll reveal that he really didn't obey his dad for the love of the father. He didn't love his father. He was obeying to get stuff for himself. The son is so furious, so angry with his dad for forgiving his brother that he refuses to go into the party. He's so mad that he's like, I'd rather go hungry than be in there with you guys. So what does the father do? I mean, put yourself in the father's shoes. This son is revealing to his father, I don't love you. Dad, I am furious with you. Dad, if you do something I disagree with, I'm going to separate myself from you. So what does the son do? Or what does the father do? 28. His father went out and pleaded with him. The father went out and pleaded with him. This line in the story is overlooked, but I think it's one of the most important lines to understand who the father is in this story. When his own son is rejecting him, when his own son is refusing to see him, when his own son is separating himself from him, the father doesn't stand in the corner of the party going, I wonder when he'll figure it out. I wonder when he'll forgive. I wonder when he is going to make the right decision. He doesn't chase him away. He pursues him. He goes out and he finds him. 28. So his father went out and pleaded with him, but he answered his father, look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours who has squandered your property with prostitutes comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him? My son, the father said, you're always with me and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost, and he is found. Even when the son is furious, even when he's mad at his dad, even when he has separated himself from his father, even when he is insulting his father's authority, the father still goes out and pursues his son. He doesn't wait for the son to figure it out. He doesn't wait for the son to come in. He goes out and finds him. He goes out and finds him. And that's actually the end of the story. And that's interesting because who gets the last word in this story? Who gets to summarize the story? It's the father, which makes me think actually the father might be the main character in this story. God is a God who pursues. Abraham Heschel was a mid-20th century Jewish rabbi, Polish-American. I know he's one of your favorite authors, I know. So in 1955, he wrote a book that I love. It was called God in Search of Man. And so he was a Jewish rabbi, Jewish thinker, and he's trying to summarize, he's trying to take all of the Old Testament and all of Jewish thought and theology, and he was trying to be like, okay, what does this boil down to? And to him, it boiled down to this phrase, God in search of man. And I always think that's fascinating because as Christians, sometimes we get this wrong. Because in our cultural milieu, a lot of times we talk about what? Like I'm looking for God, right? Or I'm searching for God, or I'm trying to find God, right? We have whole churches that would say like, I'm a seeker-sensitive church because that's, right, people are seeking God. But the truth, as Heschel puts it, is actually it's the other way around. First, God is seeking you. God is actually searching for you, for your heart, to connect to you, to forgive you. It's not you running out into the darkness to find God. It's God running out to the darkness to find you. God is a God who pursues us. If you think about the meanings here, it's just, it's beautiful. A lot of times heaven is described as this feast or this party. And so in this story, the feast and the party, that's like heaven, right? And what happens? The Father leaves the party. God left heaven. Why? To come find you. He came down from heaven, made himself one of us to find you, to pursue you. God is the God who leaves the party and goes out into the darkness of night to search for you. God is the God who pursues. So who is God? Who is God? In this world where people are encouraged to make up their own God, to go along with their own idea of truth, who is God? What can we say about God? Well, Jesus told us this story, and there's so much you can learn about who God is in this story by just examining the Father. You can learn that God is a God who loves you so much that he actually gives you the choice to love or leave him. God is a God who extends forgiveness instead of shame. God is a God who is willing to pay the cost that we can't pay. And God is a God who pursues us. This is who God is. If you're wondering who God is, these are four things that are just, sometimes we get them wrong, but this is who God is. This is a picture, it's a snapshot, it's a story to tell you who God is. You know, one of the interesting things is, if you've heard this story, you've probably heard it referred to as the prodigal son. And that's really interesting because the word prodigal doesn't actually show up in the story. So it's a little weird that we call it this. And so being someone who has a problem with being obsessed with history, I was like, I'm going to figure out why this started, right? And so I went back into like art history and historical and was trying to figure out when did this start. And so for hundreds of years, we've been actually calling this prodigal, and it started when the church was still speaking in Latin. And the word in Latin, a prodigal comes from this word from the Latin, and it means to be lavish, like to lavishly spend specifically. And so that's really interesting because there was actually two different ways that they would use this word prodigal. So prodigal means to spend lavishly, but then it has two different definitions. On one side, prodigal can mean when you spend lavishly in the sense of like you're spending recklessly. You're spending wildly. It's irresponsible. You're just wasting money. You're wasting resources. So who's prodigal in that sense? Well, it's the younger son of the story, right? He is prodigal. But there's this second interesting definition of prodigal. And it's that prodigal means to give lavishly. It's a gift given where the giver is spending freely without any regard to themselves. They're just lavishly, extravagantly giving a gift. And if you define prodigal in that way, who's prodigal in this story? It's the father. It's the father. You have this father who lavishly spends and no regard for his own. He just lavishly gives this gift to his son. He gives this robe and this ring and these sandals. He gives this party and he gives this fattened calf. He gives a portion of his estate. He gives it all, and he spends recklessly for his son. He spends it all. He's willing to give anything. You see, God is the prodigal God. God is the prodigal God. We serve a God who gave a lavish gift. A lavish gift, an extravagant gift. The God who created the Milky Way, the God who with the word lifted the Rocky Mountains up, that same God became one of us. He left the party, he left the feast of heaven to become one of us so he could die for you. The creator of all things gave his life for you. That is the greatest gift, the most extravagant gift, the most lavish gift that you could imagine. God is this prodigal God. So the next time that you're thinking of God and you want to cower down in shame and fear, that's not the real God on the porch. Because the real God is the God who's running down the road. He's running down the road for you. The real God, who God really is that he left the porch to run down the road for you. The real God is the God who stepped out of the party to come and find you. God is a prodigal God.